Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Unleashed. Research has consequences, sometimes good and sometimes bad, as we've learned the hard way in the last few years. At Colorado State's campus today, there sits an old animal pen that hasn't been touched for years, since 1967, when scientists there discovered the mule deer they were studying were mysteriously dying. Healthy deer that were taken from Colorado's wilderness, wasting away and dying. It took researchers a long time to figure out what was going on, at least a decade. And during that time, the disease quietly killed wild deer and elk across the United States and Canada. Chronic wasting disease, they discovered, was related to scrapie in sheep and goats, mad cow disease in cattle, and the deadly Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans. No one has figured out how the disease got to Fort Collins, but it started spreading. It spread onto the commercial game farms where they put in strict restrictions to stop it, which crippled the commercial game industry. They now think about half of Colorado's deer herds and about a third of its elk herds are infected. And this has affected animals all across the United States. In turn, there have been accusations that the elk ranching industry spread the disease, which has resulted in a lot more surveillance on the industry, costing ranchers a lot of money. So the research, even if well-intended, in a very restricted environment, went sideways and has resulted in devastating disease spreading across the country, the world actually, destroying deer and elk herds and having the potential to cross over to humans. So fast forward to 2021, when the National Institute of Health awarded CSU $6.7 million to build a bat research lab in Fort Collins to study bat-borne and bat-associated diseases. The grant was specifically given to the Microbiology, Immunology, and Pathology Department at the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. Now, don't get me wrong. I am a big supporter of much of the work CSU does, especially its Animal Cancer Center. When I was growing Camp Bow Wow, we sponsored a PhD research fellow there for several years in dog cancer research. They are doing incredible things there, and the team that I got to meet and get to know in that department is amazing. But after losing an estimated 20 million people to the recent pandemic worldwide, a bigger conversation needs to be had about whether it's appropriate to be doing any sort of gain-of-function research at any university, in any lab, in America, or across the world. And we need to know what the risks are versus the rewards. In the case of chronic wasting disease here in Colorado, it didn't go well. We now have a chance to pause as we consider a new research venture in our own backyard with incredible risk attached. So what is gain-of-function research, and why should we consider banning it or monitoring it very carefully? Well, it involves giving a pathogen additional or new infectious or deadly abilities, which means the scientists work to make the disease more virulent to humans or combine several viruses together. The thought is that we can get ahead of a disease, creating vaccinations and treatments proactively by doing this, but that has not been the case necessarily. Let's start with why we are even having this debate right now. It's very likely that the COVID-19 pandemic started in a lab that was doing gain-of-function research on coronaviruses. In fact, the House Oversight Committee in their final report says mounting evidence continues to show that COVID-19 may have originated from a lab in Wuhan, China. We know that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing this type of research with the help of funding and training from the United States. It's not proven that the original COVID-19 virus first appeared because of a lab leak, but it's looking likely that it did, and we might never know if it was intentional or accidental. So that's why we're asking whether such research is worth the risk, especially in our own backyard at Colorado State University, especially now that we know lab accidents aren't a what if, but rather a how often and how dangerous. The upcoming book, Pandora's Gamble, identifies more than 1,000 similar lab accidents reported to federal regulators from 2008 to 2012. Now, sometimes sloppy procedures and lax oversight are the culprits, but because of COVID, the focus is now on how dangerous the experiments themselves might be and how much we know or don't know about these. Well, according to Republicans on the Energy and Commerce Committee, when they were asking about biosafety, the Department of Health and Human Services and the NIH, in quote, have persisted in foot-dragging, stonewalling, or flat-out refusing to engage in legitimate questions, unquote. And they wonder why Americans don't trust the science anymore, or rather the scientists, or the government bureaucrats. After 2 years of many of us being called conspiracy theorists because we had questions, the Department of Energy, through consultation with the Director of National Intelligence, recently admitted that COVID was likely from a lab leak. Why are they now pretty darn sure that COVID came from a lab leak? WIV was a coronavirus research lab for years, and they have admitted their researchers regularly traveled to caves in southern China to find viruses. They also admitted that WIV's labs had bat viruses, ones related to SARS-CoV-2, before the pandemic. And they also claimed long ago that they wanted to do gain-of-function research. Some scientists have argued that the virus was a naturally occurring one, but it didn't just create itself in the seafood market. It's far more likely that someone working at the WIV was accidentally infected, stopped by the seafood market, and started a worldwide pandemic. Or perhaps it was nefarious, a biological weapon released by a hostile government, which China is now. We will likely never know, but we can certainly learn from it and make safer decisions about research because of it. As an example, did you know that emails within the State Department surfaced recently showing that officials sent out a warning about the Wuhan Institute of Virology in 2018? It said that the WIV's use of live bats to study coronaviruses posed the risk of sparking a new SARS-like pandemic. The lab, which was China's first to be granted the highest level of international bioresearch safety, known as BSL-4, it operated with safety standards on par with live bat labs in the U.S., according to activists and experts. But yet, the leak happened, resulting in the death of over 20 million people, even with all those safety standards at the highest level. Another interesting piece of information. Did you know that a 2018 grant proposal by EcoHealth Alliance, a U.S.-based nonprofit that was working with WIV, was leaked to the press in 2021? The proposal was not funded, but it talks about how EcoHealth would genetically engineer new viruses, taking the spike protein from one bat coronavirus and inserting it into a different one, and then infecting mice to see what happens. What could possibly go wrong? And what possibly could go wrong was scientists from the Wuhan Institute of Virology admittingly going into dark caves where people don't go and bringing back deadly viruses to study. Well, guess what? American researchers do the same thing. The program is called Deep VZN. America is funding scientists in the U.S., Africa, Asia, and Latin America to go into remote areas of the jungle, find animals carrying viruses that might infect humans, and bring them back or study them there. Their aim is to discover 8,000 to 12,000 new viruses, especially viruses that could cause the next pandemic. Again, the completely competent, always truthful U.S. government bureaucrats, yes, there was sarcasm there, in case you missed it, they think that they can, through these efforts, predict which of these viruses will become the next pandemic. They think they will be able to determine what the new pandemic strains will look like, and then convince governments and companies to design, manufacture, and stockpile vaccines against these viruses. So when the pandemic emerges, the new one will be prepared. Unless, oops, the virus is leaked, we're not prepared, and it kills 20 million people. I'm not saying that research on viruses and infectious disease isn't incredibly important. Vaccines, antibiotics, antivirals, and other treatments save millions of lives. And the researchers doing this work, they should be celebrated. But can we just slow down and take a moment to consider specific research that could be lethal to large populations, especially in our own backyard in Colorado? And if we are going to consider doing so, could we have transparency and open discussions around the risks? Is that too much to ask after 20 million people died? So that's my beef with CSU and Larimer County officials right now. They rushed to approve a new bat research facility at a public meeting inconveniently set during the Christmas holiday week in 2022. And the Larimer County Planning Board unanimously approved CSU's proposal to build the 14,000 square foot bat lab. We need informational meetings with the public. We need them now, and they've said there aren't any on the horizon. And the Colorado State University representative supposedly said at a public land use committee meeting that Ebola, MRSA, and SARS would not be studied, but they're in the proposal. SARS-CoV, MERS-CoV, and SARS-CoV-2, the Ebola virus, the Marburg virus, the Nipah virus, and the Hendra virus. They are all going to be studied right here in Fort Collins in a bat lab. So forgive us, folks, that don't just trust this to go well. And there's a lot of information that is coming out now, about what happened. It was just 2 months ago that the Department of Energy admitted it was likely a lab leak. 2 new shocking stashes of COVID origin documents were released recently, one involving Anthony Fauci's organization, the National Institutes of Health, and the other involving the State Department. The NIH emails, they show collusion at the highest levels of our government to hide the origin of the pandemic. In the State Department emails, they complained at the start of the pandemic that if their own warnings about the Wuhan lab had been heeded, there would have been no pandemic. Of course, they didn't tell us this. We had to wait 3 years to get these documents. I'm guessing there's a lot more they know that has not come out. And governors, state leaders, federal leaders, congressmen, congresswomen, they're catching on. So we'll have more hearings, hopefully more accountability, and hopefully more sunshine on the bad actors and the data. A few days ago, Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis signed House Bill 1387, which prohibits gain-of-function research related to pathogens. I think he's onto something. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton launched an investigation into several pharmaceutical companies recently, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, regarding whether they engaged in gain-of-function research and misled the public about doing so. And as I mentioned earlier, the Energy Department has now concluded that the COVID-19 pandemic most likely began after a laboratory leak. That's according to the Wall Street Journal, which cited a classified intelligence report that was given to the White House and members of Congress. The FBI has also publicly concluded the pandemic likely began at a lab in Wuhan. Meanwhile, America, after 3 years of going through this, says, duh, we could have told you that. So, all this to be said, I was relieved to hear a group of concerned citizens here in Colorado are asking for more time, more information, and more transparency around Colorado State University's proposal to build this NIH-funded bat vivarium in our own backyard. The grassroots group is called the COVID Bat Research Moratorium of Colorado, CBRMC. They are requesting a moratorium be placed on the project until more is known about how COVID-19 reached the public. Just want to know more information. Now, of course, the liberal Colorado media is calling them conspiracy theorists, but aren't we all, according to Kyle Clark? They responded with the message, the group responded with the message that we are not anti-science, we are pro-transparency and pro-accountability. This is in their backyard. So why not put a pause on all of this, Larimer County? Why not, Governor Polis? Why not CSU? What's the harm in more time for community discussions to earn our trust back? As part of the research for this episode, we reached out to Colorado State University and asked for a statement or for them to join us on this podcast episode, and they said thank you, but no thank you. So let's welcome Christine, the head of the COVID Bat Research Moratorium of Colorado, to talk more about this. In today's episode, I'm very grateful to have Christine Bowman, who is a warrior on this front, has been speaking out about her concerns and leading a group of folks who share her concern. So Christine, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to this point.
Well, I have a friend who lives a stone's throw away from where this bat vivarium is being proposed and breaking ground soon. They sent out a postcard to just a handful of people that live within, a site of this place. They sent them a postcard the end of November telling them of a meeting if they would like to come. It's for the county commissioner, the planning commission, where they would be doing a location and extent meeting for this building that might affect them as a neighbor. Would they like to come and learn more about it? My neighbor or my friend told me about this. They couldn't make it, but it interested me, and so I went. They only have to post that notice 24 hours in advance at the county offices and or at the courthouse. So very few people knew about this, and it was set for the 21st of December.
Oh my!
And that's right before Christmas. Nobody was paying attention. Anyway, so I went to this meeting, but I had to go by Zoom because I was out of town like everyone else for Christmas doing family things. And so the meeting was in front of the county commissioner planning people. And really, this is just a perfunctory meeting because this facility is a state-owned facility on state ground. So CSU, being a state entity, wants to build on state land. They don't have to get permission from anyone. It's a done deal. So this was a location and extent meeting, meaning where are they going to put this building? And are the commissioners, do they have any questions about it? And then the extent of what would the building be used for? And really that was the end of the meeting. Was really, they had no choice. Their hands were tied. But there were several things that came out in this meeting that bothered a lot of us. And one is that we don't want bats being researched, but the proposal for this project is supposed to be for studying a number of emerging zoonotic viruses that originate in bats that cause a high mortality in humans. Okay, these include SARS-CoV, MERS-CoV, SARS-CoV-2, which is what COVID is, Ebola, Marburg, Nipah virus, and Hendra virus. These are very deadly diseases and very virulent. Nipah virus, for instance, which is something most people aren't even really that concerned about, but in my research, I have found that that is a disease, a virus that kills pigs. We live within an hour of how many pig farms in this area? How much of our food supply is in Greeley being processed or brought here? That's something we do not want to get out. That's just one of them, right? So this is what they proposed in writing to the county, that they were going to be studying these viruses. Then when the meeting actually occurred, this is a transcript of what was said in the meeting. And it said that the facility is designed primarily for breeding purposes, okay, to expand the research that CSU is already doing. But this is what the biosafety director for CSU said. At this facility, we will not be able to study MERS, SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID, nor will we be able to study Ebola viruses. But their proposal said that those are the things they're going to study. I don't understand the discrepancy. I'd like to know where the truth lies in that. That's one of my questions.
I'm starting to hear a lot about these different viruses, Marburg being one of them, that's very dangerous and something that they're keeping an eye on. So it's interesting that there was a discrepancy there, and we'll try and get our folks on it and see if we can find out the truth.
Right. I would like to, well, and it said they were also going to build this as a biosafety level 2. What's to say they can't change that in the future, because they wouldn't have to bring that to our attention that I'm aware of. Do they have to bring that to our attention? Is that something they would inform us of, or just do without our consent? Do we get any say in any of this? Because it seems like we just don't. So the safety of this place is up to CSU, according to the statement she made in this meeting. She said, and I quote, "It is very much up to us to ensure the responsibility and the safety, security, and compliance of this research." So the NIH has given them $6.7 million to build this $10 million vivarium. Is the NIH going to be the ones overseeing this? It sounds like to me they're going to be overseeing themselves. CSU is going to be self-regulating. Maybe the NIH comes in and does a few things. But that brings up a couple of points. The NIH, we know, is part of the gain of function research and financing for what happened in Wuhan. So that, okay, red flag right there. CSU has a track record, according to them. She says, NIH chose CSU because of our longstanding track record of safe, responsible, secure, and sound science. Well, I don't know if you're aware of the chronic wasting disease that escaped from CSU's captivity and research years ago, killing millions of deer in the Western United States. I am not a scientist. If if I could be given a degree for common sense, I would have a PhD, but I can't speak learnedly to what happened with chronic wasting disease. But I've lived here for 37 years, and it just seems to be common knowledge that that's happened before from CSU. So if there's already a record from CSU of something leaking out that killed animals, why do we trust them after what happened at Wuhan with the same people, the same research? Which is another thing that Rebecca Moritz is the biosafety director for CSU. And we have a video of her on our Facebook page where she was at the University of Wisconsin in 2014. She was touting the benefits and was all excited about gain of function. She was on a panel on a medical symposium, and she was, I believe, the third speaker and was just all excited about gain of function and how the benefits of it. And then the fourth guy that gave a presentation afterwards just raked her over the coals about the dangers and the risks of gain of function.
One of the things I learned in all my studies for this episode was how really lab leaks and lab accidents are not that rare. We like to believe they are, but they're not. And even if CSU does an incredible job, every lab has vulnerabilities, and it's hard enough to get good staff to run a restaurant or do things in society right now, but to put responsibility on these technicians and the researchers to protect millions and millions of people with their work is very scary, and just causes us to take pause and think about, what do we want in our backyard? What do we feel comfortable with? What kind of research are we going to support as citizens of Colorado, especially someone who lives close by? So it was very interesting to find that data about lab leaks, and now more and more is coming out about COVID, and more of the agencies are saying, yeah, it was very likely a lab leak. And why wouldn't it happen at CSU when it happened at a level 4 lab in Wuhan, where
that's the common sense.
Yeah.
Right. So, so the gain of function that I'm concerned about is obviously that Dr. Redfield, I don't know if you watched his video on our Facebook page as well, but Dr. Redfield, he used to be the CDC director. He recently testified before Congress. The gain of function that they were doing in Wuhan was such that if a bat virus like COVID-2 gets into a human in some way, I mean, how many times, let's talk about that. How many times do you actually come in contact with a bat? But if a bat were to bite you or to give you this zoonotic, virus, he said that it would transfer from the animal to a human, but that there's no way that can go from human to human without being gain of function acceleration, right? So that tells me that this was man-made and it was done in the lab. That's the kind of thing I do not want in my backyard. I don't think and it doesn't even matter if it's in my backyard. If it gets out in my backyard, the people in Wuhan may have been ground zero, but it certainly made its way into my backyard clear over here.
Dr. Redfield, are you an advocate for a moratorium on gain of function research, particularly research on potential pandemic pathogens, and why?
Yes, I am. I think that again, I think the people that are advocates for gain of function research do believe that by doing this research, they somehow get ahead of the curve. I'm of the point of view that we don't need to make pathogens more transmissible or more pathogenic in order to get ahead of the curve. We can begin to deal with those pathogens as they evolve. I don't think this should be a decision made by scientists alone. This is a societal decision. There should be a broad debate about whether this research is really necessary. And if so, we should decide how to do it safely and responsibly. So I think this is much more complicated than people think. And if we are to go down that path, I would argue there's a few labs in the world that should be, with multiple redundancy, in containment to do this. But I'm not convinced it's to an advantage, and this is why in the Wall Street Journal op-ed I strongly recommend that we have a moratorium on gain-of-function research, similar to what we had in the Obama administration.
So in your expert opinion, was the Wuhan Institute conducting gain-of-function research on
Absolutely.
coronaviruses? Thank you.
So one of the things that CSU has tried to tell us is that they do gain-of-function research. They've admitted this. Okay, so they send out this question and answer flyer about the safety of labs. And one of the questions on this flyer is, does CSU do gain-of-function research? And this is what it says. Gain-of-function is when an organism gains a new ability or property. Some of these functions can be positive. For example, plants that are more drought tolerant or making mosquitoes resistant to transmitting dengue fever. Okay, they're playing with nature, they're playing God, not a fan. However, there is a subset of gain-of-function experiments that pose certain safety and security concerns. CSU has no plans to conduct gain-of-function research of concern.
And they just said in their proposal that they were going to study these very dangerous viruses. So that's
right. So there's too much contradiction, and they're not making it clear. They're not committing that they're not going to be doing the same kinds of things that NIH funded the last time. And who gets to say what research is of concern?
What has their response been to you about your concerns and your group's concerns? Have they contacted you or spoken to you and tried to alleviate those?
So I started communicating with Miss Moritz on January 13th is the first time I emailed her and asked her for a meeting. One-on-one, the two of us answer my questions because I have 563 people on my Facebook page that are concerned about this. And she said, oh, I'm out of town, I'll get back to you. It went back and forth, back and forth. Around January 24th, it just sort of went silent. She went silent. So what I did hear from her was that sometime in the spring, we will engage the public. We are planning a meeting and engaging the public to answer your concerns, answer your questions. And I thought, that's great. We're going to meet in some conference room, large conference room at CSU, and it doesn't need to be ugly. We'll just get some answers to our questions and move on from there and see what we think. Still in here. So April 5th, I get an email from a man named Greg Harrison, who is an associate vice president of strategic communications at CSU. And what he said to me was interesting. I'm looking for that here. It says, I'm responding to your query to Rebecca Moritz about the bat vivarium. We do not have any public meeting about the facility scheduled at this time. However, we're in the process of updating the attached vivarium fact sheet. So if you have any questions, just let me know and I'll facilitate responses. In other words, we're stonewalling you. We don't want you to ask any more questions. If you do, we'll just answer them directly and vaguely, I'm sure. I really haven't followed up with him because I really think that they need to engage the public. And we need to really inundate them with questions. So if you don't mind, I'm going to give his email address out. It's Greg, Greg .Harrison @Colo State, COLO state.edu. And he would love to answer our questions and tell us all about what they're doing. But between now and then, you'll get an attached fact sheet about what they're doing at CSU with this bat research. So it's a picture of someone holding a cute little bat in their bare hands. Isn't that adorable? That's adorable.
It's not.
It's not, because they're trying to tell us how safe they're going to be in this bat lab, but they have a picture of a bare hand ready to be bitten by a bat that must be ill in order for them to study these zoonotic viruses. It's sending the wrong message that bats are just adorable and you could just pick one up in your hand, when really what they're trying to tell you is these are rotten little creatures that carry around diseases that are going to kill humanity.
Yeah, it seems, this is such a trend in government, and why I call my podcast Truth, Lies, and Politics, because we just want transparency. We want to have discussions. We just went through one of the worst events in history and lost 20 million people around this globe because they weren't willing to make sure that every stop was pulled out to keep a lab safe. And so in order to regain our trust and to put a facility like this in our backyard, it would behoove them to have a conversation, to answer questions, to be transparent and accountable and gain our trust and be supportive of something like this. But it happens over and over again in the government. It's all smoke and mirrors. You don't worry your little head about it until it's a pandemic and it kills 20 million people, destroys our kids' mental health in Colorado, and shuts down our schools, et cetera. It's fascinating to me that they think that's the right approach.
One of my concerns about this facility is that they're going to be getting their bats from the same place, I understand, as the Wuhan lab got their bats. These are not bats from local here. These are going to have to be isolated outside the country. Then they're going to have to be transported. You know, I'm concerned about how they're going to have diseased bats coming from another area of the world anyway. So
sounds like they're already doing this research and they already have bats at one facility or a lab at CSU somewhere. They had an incident where 3 bats died in the laundry or the sheet when they were taking it down. So they've been doing this. I don't think a lot of people know about it. And I'm very grateful for you bringing this to everyone's attention. And if for nothing else, for us to have a conversation and provide transparency and let people know so that if they do have concerns, they can get their questions answered, which is all you're asking. You're not saying, shut the dang thing down without any discussion. It's
right.
Tell us the truth about what's happening and what the risks are, and let the people be involved in the decision about whether this is the right thing for Colorado or not.
Right, because it's our backyard, it's the safety of our children, it's the safety of our neighborhood, it's the safety of our city, our county, our state, and then the world eventually. But I think they should include us. We are literally COVID bat research moratorium of Colorado. All we wanted was a pause until we were satisfied with our questions, whatever pushback to our satisfaction, if we could come to an agreement, if there were disagreements about how they're handling it, how they're building it, whatever it is that we might, but they're just stonewalling us and not really giving us information.
My understanding that they're going to break ground soon in the spring and it'll be ready to go in early 2025. Is that your understanding?
I understand they're going to break in the summer now, which is right around the corner. And yeah, it'll be done in about a year.
Okay. And what's the address, or where's the location going to be? I know it's Fort Collins and on CSU's campus, but where?
It's actually on the western campus, out where the CDC is. If you're aware that there's a CDC facility here, right at the bottom of the foothills here, right under Horsetooth Reservoir. It's about a mile from my house. You could throw a rock, and so we're ground zero if something happens.
Tell us what people should do if they're concerned or want to get engaged or want answers. You talked about his email address. How can they get involved in your group and your effort?
So if they go to our Facebook page, which is COVID Bat Research Moratorium of Colorado, and if they join our group, then they can see all of our past research, all of the papers, all of the videos, comments, that kind of thing. People are being very civil on this Facebook page. I'm very proud of people. What we need to do also is to write to Greg Harrison, ask him your specific questions, ask for a meeting, because I think there should be one. We should also write to all of our congressmen, our senators, our reps of the county, the city. I spoke with the mayor of Fort Collins, and she said it's out of her jurisdiction. She wasn't really interested. I think because CSU is the largest employer of Fort Collins, she doesn't want to rock that boat, which is unfortunate. So I think the more we email or send physical letters or make a phone call and leave a message, I think the more they might need to actually address this. We also have started a yard sign campaign. So it says Stop the Bat Lab. And you can pick those up at 518 South Bryan Avenue in Fort Collins, just off of Mulberry Street across from City Park. They cost us $5 each. So if you leave $5, great. We appreciate getting paid back for those. Otherwise, they're out of my pocket, and that's okay too. But we would like those to be all over town so that the word can get out as well. I've had a couple of people that are against this vivarium and against this research, but they don't want to put a sign in their yard because they feel like they're going to be targeted, or that it looks like there's some kind of conspiracy nuts. And, it starts a conversation, and that's really all we want, is a conversation in this community. So no one has egged my house. No one has caused any sort of, problems with anyone I know that has one of these signs, but it has created the ability for me to tell my neighbors what my views are and how I want to protect them as well as myself. It's interesting. This is not a partisan issue, not at all. It's about humanity. It's about whether or not we should, not just because we can, maybe we need to study these things, especially, here. So anyway, it's interesting. We have Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s group has interviewed me as well. And that's the last place I thought I would be talking to. So it's not a partisan issue at all.
I agree. And I think if the reporters lived within a mile of this new facility and had small children and were worried about something happening or getting out, then they'd probably have a different attitude. So we'll see how that goes. But Christine, thank you so much for your time today and for the effort you're putting in to provide more transparency for folks who live in Fort Collins and that community, but also in Colorado and America. Tell us one more time the 3 things that people should do to engage in this process and learn more.
They can go to our Facebook page, COVID Bat Research Moratorium of Colorado, and they can learn all of these things for themselves, just looking at the previous posts.
And you have a website too, right?
And we also have a website, covidbats.org. And it doesn't have all of that research on it. So the Facebook page is better. If you don't have a Facebook page, borrow your grandkids. Just check it out there. And then if you can write to Greg Harrison at CSU, it's Greg, Greg Harrison at colostate.edu. And ask him specific questions, ask for more information, tell him you'd like a meeting, whatever that might be, whatever it is that you're feeling about this is in his lap. He needs to answer for this. And then the other thing is that you can get a yard sign if you would like. The address for that is 518 South Bryan Avenue in Fort Collins. It's just off Mulberry and City Park. And if you want to instant message me through the Facebook page, you're more than welcome to do that as well.
Well, thank you, Christine. We'll stay in touch. I'll let you know if CSU responds and wants to do an interview. And we'll hold them accountable to being truthful and honest and answering our questions as citizens of the great state of Colorado.
Thank you, Heidi. I hope they do. I hope they come on and give you some answers. I'd like those answers.